I'm Jason Hartz, and this is the 2 Minutes of Guts podcast
with career coach Mike Fitzgerald.
I work with people from college kids to senior executives. I find that in almost every case, that the core matter is about...
We get honest with ourselves.
I always say to people, when I meet with them for career coaching, they can tell pretty quickly that I get pretty excited for them and with them. But I always say, if I'm more excited about your career than you are, that's a problem.
Mike Fitzgerald, welcome to 2 Minutes of Guts.
Thank you, Jason. I'm so excited to be with you. I'm really looking forward to our conversation, and thank you very much for inviting me.
You got it. Anytime. I owe you big time. All right, so let's start off. Mike, a running theme in all of my discussions with my successful guests revolve around confidence, timing, and experience. And timing just so happened to be mentioned in your bio. We're going to get to timing, but I want to start today's discussion with a question around the clients you're working with these days and the mindsets of your clients. Between confidence, timing, and experience, which of the three are you finding your clients need the most focus?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's pretty easy to answer. I'd say when I work as a career coach, as I do these days, and I work with people from college kids to senior executives, I find that in almost every case, that the core matter is about confidence. It doesn't matter how young or old or experienced or not people are. I think a lot of people struggle with confidence. And then I think usually the matters around timing and experience kind of take care of themselves. And the timing thing is probably a little bit more about learning the art of discernment. As I often say, long before you decide, you discern. And discerning is kind of paying attention to those threads of connection with your feelings and your thoughts and what you're attracted to and what you're drawn to superficially, and then it goes away, and what you're drawn to and it gives you more peace over time, and you're drawn even deeper to it over time. Those are important clues. But regarding confidence, Jason, I would say that in my work, a lot of people come to the work thinking, oh, I just need someone to look at my resume, or I need help with interviewing skills. And we do that stuff. But I find that the most important work is really around mindset. It's around attitude. It's around beliefs. I always say to people, full disclosure kind of thing, I'm a relentlessly optimistic, positive person. But I don't believe in preaching toxic positivity. I believe in shining a light on the beliefs, the attitudes, the things that are getting in the way. So we talk about them. So talk about those kinds of things. And usually they're driven by some kind of fear or doubt. And I think it's much better to shine a light on them than to ignore them. But in order to get to confidence, I also offer an invitation to people. I try not to preach it and I try not to push it, but I try to help people to see that ideally you want to be grounded in abundance with whatever you're searching for. A sense of abundance versus a sense of scarcity. And in the world of career and vocation and work, that means you're grounded in a sense of, I have many gifts. I have many talents. I have many strengths. I have many skills. I have many values. I have many interests. And that's all just your self-awareness. And then when you take it on the road, which to me is ideally about networking mostly, because I'm a big believer in networking and less about applying to hundreds of jobs, then you're showing up in a whole different way than if you're grounded in scarcity. If you're grounded in scarcity, you're driven by fear, and I think you show up unduly submissive and compliant. And really, when you meet with people, you're starting at such a low point that all you want is for them to like you and to maybe give you a job. And I just think you can have much more creative, robust, positive conversations if you're grounded in a sense of your capabilities, in a sense of abundance than scarcity.
Wow. So I was taking notes during that because on that one response alone, I think we can go the distance for a two-part podcast. What I always find incredible when it comes to confidence, what's amazing, and I think people would be incredibly surprised at, is some of the most top performer, the highest paid or the most successful performers you see lack serious confidence. That's probably, the number one reason why obviously some people make it in the industry and in whatever industry that propels you to whatever you're seeking. And so I just find that at all levels, confidence is something that you consistently work on.
Absolutely.
And I know, and again, just because I think you have a bit of a theater background, right?
I actually don't know.
Okay, I thought you had.
You might be confusing me with George Clooney, who I'm often confused for.
That's it.
That's what it is.
Yeah, he's our next guest. I bumped him actually to have you.
No, I get it. I understand.
What I want the audience to start to think of as well, and it's probably, stand-up comedy in my background, it's so transactional. And I, for better or worse, would live and die with every performance. And depending on if things went well, it was as if, right, I could fly basically. And if things didn't go well, I was going to pack my bags and move to Tucson or do something else. And I think, especially for sellers and some of for perhaps a large my listening audience that are going to be in sales, you can't get down. And if you miss a sale, it has no bearing on who you are in terms of your skills, because as we know, sales go sideways for 8 million reasons that are not the fault of the salesperson, right? Next question I got for you.
Can I speak to what you were just saying, Jason, if you don't mind? I'm acquainted with that kind of doubt, and I'm acquainted with the lack of confidence. And if I look back, when I worked in sales when I got out of college, and one of the things that I learned pretty quickly was that I was petrified. Petrified. I mean, petrified to the point where I couldn't sleep all night long if I had to make a sales presentation. And I sold Armstrong floors for a wholesaler. I'm not making this to boards of directors of Amazon. I'm making presentations to mom and pop store owners in flooring stores in Buffalo. And I was so nervous and so scared because it was so out of my comfort zone. And what I realized was that I needed to develop a lot more confidence in my public speaking. And at the time, a Dale Carnegie course, which probably now costs many thousands, cost $450. And I had saved $500. And it was the first time I'd ever had that much money in my whole life. I was, maybe 6 months out of college or 7 months out of college, whatever. And I asked the vice president of my company if they would help me to pay for a public speaking course, that I thought it would help me as a salesperson. And they said, no, they don't offer that kind of assistance, which was really good because it put it back on me. And I remember I had this image in my head, Jason, of I can either hold on really tightly to my $500 and then maybe gradually it can become 600, 700, 800. But all along, I'm going to be afraid and nervous and anxious, or I can let go and I can invest. I can let this money flow out of my hands, invest it in my growth. And I took the class. And not only did I take it, I was then a graduate assistant 3 or 4 times after that. And I'll tell you, looking back now, many, many, many years, I was never afraid to speak in public again. I conquered my fear, and it changed everything about my life because I just felt like it was something I had to conquer, and I had to own it myself. So the fact that I had to take $450 of my $500 and let it go and invest it, that changed my life in a whole different direction. And it helped me to believe in myself, helped me to feel like I can do things. And it set me in a direction where I had a pattern of those kinds of behaviors, that when I'm nervous, when I'm afraid, I'm going to figure it out and I'm going to conquer it and I'm going to go beyond it. And that's what I feel like I've done.
I want the audience to know that I did not send you a check to say that, because I would not be sitting here in front of you, Mike, because I invested in my career early and I saw gaps. I was lacking confidence in sales. Here I was, a stand-up for 9, 10 years, and then I'm opening a business or I'm trying to land clients, and I didn't know. I knew that I needed help, and I made that investment, and it pays dividends. Invest in yourself always. It's always going to pay dividends. Mike, can you boil down your career successes to a time in which you exerted 2 minutes of guts to progress your career?
Absolutely. I've got a few options, but I'm going to go with one in particular that jumps into my mind. When I was 38 years old, my wife and I bought a house, which means we didn't buy the house really. We bought it. We took a mortgage out. I was a family counselor. My wife was a social worker. We scraped to save up money for a down payment. We got the house, which we're really excited about. 5 days later, our daughter was born, which is awesome news. We didn't know if we were having a boy or a girl, but our daughter was born. It was fantastic, and we're really happy. And about a week later, I got the news. I was a family counselor for a social service agency, and I got the news about a week or two later that the agency I worked for, and I was making not much money, maybe $30,000 a year at the time, 1995. And the news came that the agency was dropping everyone from salary. Everyone's going to move to fee for service. No more health benefits, no more health insurance, anything like that. And first thing I said to my wife, and I think this made all the difference in the world, and she was with me all the way. I have to give her all the credit in the world. But the first thing I said to my wife is, something great's going to happen. Something great's going to happen. And the other thing I want to say is we only had enough money in the bank for maybe another month, maybe 1 month mortgage. So I began a journey of networking, which I didn't know much about. Now I teach networking, but at the time I just began with some friends. I reached out to friends. I had a general idea that I might want to work in human resources. My networking led me to some really awesome people who opened my eyes up. And I started to become aware of beliefs I had, and beliefs that some were helping me and some were not helping me. And one that was not helping me was an unconscious belief that I only became aware of when I was struck by how nice people were, how kind people were, how generous people were. And I was struck by how I was surprised by that. And the reason I was surprised by that, when I reflected on it a little bit more, was I had a belief that was born of my background being in not-for-profit, ministry, counseling, education. And my belief was basically that business people are all greedy bastards who don't give a damn about anybody. And my belief was one that was, on further reflection, it was naive, it was ignorant. I had to be humble enough to take a look at it, and it was wrong. And it was also self-serving, because I was sort of in the classic do-gooder category of being the person who's saying, oh, I don't make much money, but at least I'm doing, good work and I'm helping people out and things like that. And then I started to see that, firstly, I'm wrong about so many of these people, and also to say, who am I to judge them? Really, it's inappropriate. So anyway, I changed my belief, and it opened me up to a really robust experience of networking where I met awesome people, and I met a guy who ran a search firm, and I kind of fell in love with this guy. I just thought he was awesome. His name was Bob Gaddy, and I loved his energy, and he was sort of the guru of human resources search firms. He couldn't place me because I was entry level as far as HR. But he spent 2 hours talking with me, telling me about the field of HR. And in the middle of the meeting, I had a moment. And my moment was, I want to work for this guy. I didn't tell him. He wasn't interviewing me. He was just being kind and giving me an information meeting. But I didn't forget the moment. And about a month later, Jason, my networking led to another search firm, and I had an offer from them. And I asked him if I'm good at this, and I felt like I was going to be good at it. But I said, if I'm good at this, what might I make in my first year? Now, mind you, this is 1995, a while ago. And they said, you probably make about $60,000. Now, I had never made more than $30,000 in my life. I had a new house and I had a new baby. I was learning how to change diapers and things. And I realized I needed not just a new job, but a new career. And I have an offer on the table that would double my income. And this is the decision that I made. And it was a discernment. And I checked in with my wife to make sure she was on board with this. But what I said to my wife was, I said, they seem like nice people, but I don't feel the same about them as I did with this Bob Gaddy guy. And so I'm going to turn it down. And she said, I support you. If you think that's the right move, turn it down. So I turned down, and I wasn't interviewing anywhere else. I had no other offers. I had nothing else going on. And I called Bob Gaddy back. And in all the years I came to know him, I never told him I turned this job down because of him, because I didn't think it was fair. I didn't want to act like he owed me anything, or that I didn't want him feeling sorry for me. But I did call him back and tell him I had an offer that I turned down. I just didn't think it was the right fit. And so that was, to me, a moment it took some guts. But it was clear to me it was the right thing to do, Jason. I turned it down. I went back. Bob said, come on in. I want you to meet my partner in the business. And she interviewed me. And at the end of the interview, she told me 30 years later, she said, Mike, do you remember when we met? I said, yeah, I remember it really well. And she said, it wasn't going that well for a while. And I said, really? I didn't know that. But it made sense because I had never interviewed a person. I didn't have much business acumen. I didn't have a lot of relevant experience, but I had a confidence, Jason. And my confidence was that everything I've ever done has been relationship focused. And I can, and that's what I do. And I can learn this. I'll learn how to be a search person. I'll learn how to recruit. I'll be awesome at it. And at the end of the meeting, this is what I said to Judy Baker. Judy Banker was her name. She's the search person. She was just a phenomenal leader. And at the end of the meeting, I said, Judy, I guarantee you, if you hire me, you will never regret it. And 30 years later, she accentuated this point with her hand, she said, that's why we hired you. And so that was a moment that took guts. I had a house, a baby. I had no money. I needed a new career. I had every reason in the world to be paralyzed by fear. And I just decided I'm not going to be. I'm going to see this as an exciting opportunity. I'm going to find out what life is going to offer me, and I'm not going to settle. And that's my story.
I love that story. What I really like about that story is that you can change your beliefs because assumptions lead to opinions. Assumptions lead to opinions which form beliefs. And if you can start, look, I'm not going to get very political, right? There's a big divide going on, but there needs to be some, like, people could start to change their opinions, their assumptions. It might lead to further dialogue. And what I really like what you said as well is that just like in sales or just like in stand-up, that's the first part of my book, is dedicated to confidence and the ability. That's what people are going to buy into. And having the confidence to run a sales call effectively, having the ability to stand in front of a group of strangers after someone went up before you and completely destroyed the room, either for good or bad. I mean, going up after someone is tanked is no easy. There's
I
no
can
easy
imagine,
job, right? But also, selling into a company where the last 3 providers failed as well is difficult. And so people buy confidence. They want to see confidence. And, again, that 3-legged bar stool of experience and timing just rolls right up into confidence. And I like that timing, because there's something about anybody that has achieved success, that has pushed their chips into the center of the table and gambled, knowing that if it didn't work out this time, it was going to work out another time, and it's going to happen for me. And that's why I want younger sellers or anybody to take risk early, because the folks I work with on occasion now that have been in their careers for a long time, mortgage, 2 kids in college, dance lessons, John D. I'm looking outside. I've $2,000 for a lawn tractor. It's too much. It just knowing and having that confidence that's going to work out, and leaning on your network. That even today, people might think that things are so bad, and people are. I think that there are people still out there that are willing to help others. And
Absolutely.
this podcast is proof of that. Obviously, I asked you for help and you gave me help.
I think, the word network is really important. I think what I've learned as a career coach is very few people actually do networking. They talk about it, they think about it, they imagine that they should, but they don't actually do much of it. And the way I think of it is this: in terms of your life project, your career, your path, your journey. And I think this is good news. And I say this to anyone and myself, you drive it. Like, there's no one else going to drive this. It's for you. So, like, I always say to people when I meet with them for career coaching, they can tell pretty quickly that I get pretty excited for them and with them. But I always say, If I'm more excited about your career than you are, that's a problem. So you drive this. It's on you. But I think what people mistake is that they often think that this burden of it's on me means it's all on me. And I feel like no, it's not like that at all. It means it's coming from you. So it's from within you, your spirit, your heart, your energy. It's going to come from within you, and you're going to give yourself permission to do a lot of the things you need to do. But you know what? There are tons of people ready, willing, and able to help you, to give you advice, to give you information, to 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 encourage you, to remind you of some of the best parts of yourself when you forget them. And we all need that. And you know what? None of us who has success gets there on our own. Though I believe I've driven a lot of what I've done, and I'm feel pretty capable that I've done what I've done. Tons of people have helped me, have opened doors for me, have introduced me to people. And in a way, the more you buy into it, the more you're a beneficiary of it. It's definitely true that in the world of abundance, the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. Because the more you're open to the idea that people can help you, the more you're humble enough to accept help, the more you're open to asking, you're going to find almost unlimited possibilities to receive help and are going to prove that you're not in this by yourself. But if you're convinced that that's not true, everyone's out for themselves, people are mean-spirited, or they're not kind, or they're not generous, well, you will create a world which will prove that that's true as well. And it's really up to each of us to be open to the kind of world we want to build and the kind of career we want to build.
100%, Mike. As you were speaking, again, it just goes to show why you're successful. Is like I'm ready. I think I need to pay for this session, don't I? Because you're giving me a boost.
I think that's a good idea, Jason. I'm glad you brought that up. I was gonna raise that. But I'm glad since it came from you. I think we just send it to me, okay?
I've never been more excited to start my day, so you talk about inspiration. People want to work for people that inspire them as well. And so people can pick up on it. It's how I got my first job working on a movie set in 1988 in Bangor, Maine. Stephen King had a movie come to town called The Graveyard Shift.
Yeah.
And I was 19, I think. And it was and then my sophomore year, and it was summer, and I got onto the set. Somehow they made me a production assistant, which means basically I'm getting coffee and running scripts around and making sure no one walks through a shot. And it was probably one of the best summers of my life. It would have never happened unless, and I found out years later on probably my fifth or sixth movie with the guy that hired me. I said, why did you hire me? I was halfway through getting a mass communication degree. And he goes, you're the only one that kept calling and wanted it bad enough.
I love it. I love it. That's an interesting metaphor, that getting on the set, just showing up. I'm going to tell you a quick little story that you just remind me of something. When I got out of college, and I had flunked a class my last semester, and I was a bit of a knucklehead by my own admission in college, and I was immature and all these things like a lot of college kids are. And after flunking a class, I painted houses for a while, and then the fall came, and I realized I should probably get a job, and I didn't really know what that meant. And I went to this agency, and I learned about a sales training position. It was called merchandising assistant, which is a fancy way to describe a job, which was basically cleaning the racks in flooring stores and then being available if a sales job opened up. But I was sort of new to this. I'd never interviewed anywhere before. So I didn't have a car. I put my new suit on. I planned on spending about an hour and a half taking 3 or 4 different buses to get from where I lived in South Buffalo to North Tonawanda, which was about 20 miles away. I didn't plan how long it would actually take to get there on these buses. I didn't know that it was going to rain that day. I didn't have an umbrella, and I didn't have a raincoat. And I'm a runner. So, and I get kind of impatient. So if I'm waiting, I was waiting for the bus and the bus wasn't coming. I was also hitchhiking and running while it rained. And at a certain point, Jason, I realized that I'm going to be late for my first interview ever. And I'm not talking like I'm going to be 5 minutes late. I'm going to be an hour and a half late. This is how much I botched this. This is how, as much as an idiot and as much of a knucklehead as I was, I totally screwed up. And I was going to be an hour and a half late. But I had one idea in my head. I still got to get there. And I got to get there, not to get the job. Who to hire someone who's an hour and a half late? I'm going to get there to apologize. Because this is unacceptable. This is embarrassing. This is humiliating. And I just need to stand in front of the hiring manager and say, I'm really sorry. I know you'd never hire someone like me probably, but I just want you to know I'm really sorry. So I showed up at this place an hour and a half late. I've been in pouring rain and my suit is all wrinkled and my hair is matted down with the water. And I asked for the sales manager named Jim Platter, and the office manager took one look at me and said, you kind of looked at me like, wow, interesting guy. And the sales manager came out, a big, gruff guy. He comes out and he looks at me and he says, Jesus, kid, what the hell happened to you? Because I look like crap. And I said, Mr. Platter, my name is Mike Fitzgerald. I'm really sorry. I had an interview with you at 1 o'clock and it's like 2:30 now. And I just wanted to apologize. I'm so sorry. I live in South Buffalo. I didn't have a car. I didn't really anticipate how far it would be. I took a bunch of buses. I ran a few miles. I hitchhiked a little bit. I did everything I could, Mr. Platter, but I didn't get here anywhere near the time. And I just came to apologize to you. And this is what he said to me. He said, Jesus Christ, kid, if you want the job that bad, you can have it. And that's how I was hired. He hired me on the spot. And why did he hire me? Because sort of like you, I showed up. And he said, you did what to get here? And the fact that I was late was irrelevant to him. It was like, you want it that bad? You showed up to tell me you're sorry? You got the job. And I was hired and I worked there for 2 years. And that was a great start to my career.
That's a phenomenal story. I'm glad we were able to get to that. That's why I love this stuff.
Hey, can I tell you one other quick thing? The story I said earlier about meeting the search person and saying, if you hire me, you'll never regret it. I didn't finish that, but basically, I worked there for 22 years as a headhunter. In being a person who never cared particularly much about money, but now I did because I had a baby and a house and a mortgage and all these things. I turned down the $60,000 a year job that would have doubled my income. Well, my first year in search, I made 85, and my second year, maybe 150. And so it just was that there was a reward there that I had to trust my instincts. I had to trust my intuition. I had to trust my ability to learn something new. And I also have to admit, I really floundered for a few months in the job, and I was a little bit afraid they might fire me because I didn't know what the heck I was doing. But after a few months, I started to get my sea legs. I started to feel like I can do this. I started to feel like the things I intuited in the beginning, which were that I could transfer my relationship capabilities to search. I found out it was true and I could do it and I was good at it. And I spent 22 awesome years doing that.
Well, let me ask perhaps one last question because we're having such a great conversation and this might take a while, this one. So of confidence, timing, and experience, timing is a tricky one. And you kind of alluded to this earlier in our discussion, when to push your chips into the center of the table and when to stay silent. Unfortunately, you aren't following your clients around to meetings and placing your hand on their shoulder and say, no, put your hand down. Not now. Read the room, please. Put that arm down. Now, we don't have a Mike Fitzgerald that we can bring to our meetings or to our job, what's the word? Our job reviews or things like that. So talk to us about time. This is going to be a tough one. Maybe it's not, but timing's a tricky one. When do you assert your 2 minutes of guts where it won't impact you negative. I guess you don't know if it's going to impact you negatively until you get your guts and try it.
I think I think what helps is that all along the way, if you're cultivating a sense of self-awareness, that the timing thing is just a continuation of that. So I believe in the power of discernment, which happens over time.
Mm.
In discernment, you're paying attention to cues and you're learning and you're noticing how things make you feel, and you're not overreacting to things, but it's sort of things are percolating a little bit. And so if it's the time to make a career change, it's not just because you had one tough conversation with one person, or it's not just because you didn't get your cup of coffee that day, or it's not just because you didn't get one sale. That there's been an ongoing inner conversation happening where you're paying attention to what you're drawn to, what you recoil from, what you enjoy, what brings you pleasure, what brings you deep joy, what brings you satisfaction, and what matters to you. And then I think it's almost like a cumulative effect of those kinds of moments lead to the places of awakening, where there's like an epiphany and you say, this is it. I'll give you an example of one I had. I had 2 years in sales when I started out. I didn't end up staying in sales at that point in my life. I spent about 15 years in ministry, counseling, and education. And the simple thing that led, in terms of the timing of my deciding to leave the sales job, they seemed to like me. I was pretty good at it because I noticed something in my week. I had started teaching. This was a volunteer thing I did. I was sort of reconnecting with my faith of my childhood. I'm a Catholic Christian. I'm not proselytizing, but it's just my background. And I started teaching confirmation class, which is for those who don't know what that is, it's a religious education class for high school sophomores or freshmen or whatever. These were sophomores. These are kids who would come like once a week for about 9 months for a religious education session. And, I would presume they probably didn't really want to be there, but I was young. I was 22 years old, 23 maybe. And this is my discernment. I started to notice that I loved teaching that class. I loved being with those kids, and I felt drawn to it, and I felt like it was meaningful. Like what I was doing was meaningful and it mattered. And that little thread of connection to those moments led me to start to think, I don't think I'm going to stay in sales right now at this point in my life. I took a trip around the country with a buddy of mine. We spent about 3 months talking to each other, reading books. He was a couple years younger than me, just graduated from college. And it led to my coming back to Buffalo, where I'm from. And I taught first and second grade religion for a year. I had no awareness of what it is to teach a first grader. In fact, when I first walked into the room on the weekend with the headmistress of the school, I should have kept it to myself, but I didn't even think of that. I just said, oh my God, they get behind those little desks? Like I had no idea how small kids were in first and second grade. But anyway, it started me on a different path. I did that for a year. And then I had an internship in campus ministry at the University of San Francisco for a year. And then I came to Boston College and I did a master's in pastoral ministry for another year. And then I joined the Jesuit Religious Order, which is an order in the Catholic Church. And I did it for 5 years, where I worked with prisoners on death row in Jamaica. I worked with homeless persons in Boston. I taught high school in Maine. I studied philosophy in Chicago. And then I was director of diversity at BC High, and I taught religion there. And all these adventures happened really because I had this intuition that something about ministry or counseling or education is really what I want to do with my life. And even though I later came back to as a headhunter, I had a sales kind of role to it. And even now as a career coach, I develop business in some ways. Mm-hmm. All these different things I've done have come with me along the way. I'm a better career coach because I worked in sales, because I worked in youth ministry, because I worked in teaching, because I worked as a headhunter. And I'll tell you, I talk to some people who are 40 years old and they tell me they feel like they're too old. Well, I'm going to be 68 years old in June, and I feel like I've got so much ahead of me, and I'm so excited about life, and I'm not sure what my next journey will be or my next path, but I'm fired up about it, and I just feel like I've been blessed with this openness to discover the abundance in life that's been offered to me, and to not be stuck in scarcity. When I go there, sometimes I try not to visit for too long. The sense of doubt and fear and I notice it. I feel it sometimes, but I don't hang out there too long.
Let's end it here on that note, Mike. Tremendous. Thank you so much. For our listeners that could have been inspired by our discussion, I know that I have found a tremendous value working with you. How can folks find you?
I'm a frequent flyer on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is really where I have most of my presence. I purposely don't have a website, which I don't necessarily recommend for most small businesses. But part of it is that I want to be busy enough, but I don't want to be too busy. So I find that I just don't want to have to worry about a website and then trying to optimize my efficiency on that. So I'd say if you look up Mike Fitzgerald Career Coach, you'll find me on LinkedIn. If anyone wants to reach out to me by email, mfitzcareercoach@gmail.com. If there's anyone who has an interest in reaching out, I'd encourage them to do so. And I want to thank you, Jason, for making this available. I really treasure our relationship, and I think the world of you. And I'm always excited to hear what you're doing and your openness to taking risks and trying things and learning from successes and failures. To me, is really inspiring, and I learn a ton from you, and I really appreciate you.
Thanks, Mike. Until next time, everybody. Thanks again.